Oskar Kokoschka truly is an artist who worked outside of the ism. When he is labeled as being a Germanist expressionist, it exposes a serious misunderstanding both of his work and ideas. He has been quoted as remaining apart from the historical vanguard, focusing on bearing artistic witness to his times. Expressionists try to link him to German and Central European figurative tradition that has its roots in Romanticism, but his stylistic as well as his conceptual differences with those painters whose work may appear similar at first glance are actually quite different. For Kokoschka, life had to be dealt with on the aesthetic, ethical, and spiritual or religious level simultaneously. His waking life, his dream world, his visions and his hallucinations were formed into portraits and landscapes, allegories and illustrations of enduring beauty and historical significance. His paintings reveal the inner tension of the subject or the circumstances they depict. However, because of the dynamics of both conscious and unconscious symbolism, many of his portraits and landscapes acquire their own kind of allegorical significance. The people who Kokoschka painted portraits of possessed strong dramatic elements of personality and often were political or artistic figures of consequence. His first portraits caused public scandal in Vienna. Kokoschka has said that when painting his portraits, he wanted to have a really good look at people, to watch their behavior, to get to know the nature of the society in which we had to live. Here is an early portrait by Kokoschka from 1909. This is entitled Children Playing. This double portrait shows the tension in the positioning of the children's head and hands. It was not received well because the people did not like the melancholy look on the children's faces. They didn't want to see children depicted as being troubled or having fears. This is a portrait of Martha Hirsch, also painted in 1909. Her nervous, expressive way that he paints her hands revealed the disturbing potential of the image. This self-portrait is a bitter and ironic reply to the inclusion of his work in the Nazi exposition. Entitled Self-Portrait of a Degenerate Artist, this was painted in 1937. During this time, the Nazis held a degenerate art show in Munich. This exhibition consisted of modernist artwork chaotically hung, accompanied by text labels deriding the art. Artists whose work hung in the show were either confiscated and or destroyed. A third of Kokoschka's work was lost during this time. As you can see in the painting, there is a deer and a hunter in the background. These are an allusion to persecution and flight. His expression conveys the betrayal of hope born during the years between World War I and World War II. Now I'll go into a couple of his landscapes. This landscape is entitled Sea Spider. Here we see a view from Kokoschka's home in Polperro, Cornwall, where he lived between 1939 and 1940. The crab dominating the foreground lends a particular air of menace to the painting. The swimmer, which is actually a self-portrait of Kokoschka, represents Czechoslovakia, and the crab represents Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister at the time. This painting shows how the crab would only have to put out one claw to save him from drowning, but remains aloof instead. This next landscape has been described as being the most important work done by Kokoschka during this period. Painted in 1966, this landscape is entitled New York, Manhattan with Empire State Building. This is a view of New York during its reconstruction. Here, the artist is bearing witness to a world rising up again from its ashes. This is the first of his allegorical paintings that I'm going to talk about. Painted in 1941 and entitled Loreley, this painting refers to a mythical Rhine woman who lured sailors to their death. The painting is said to mock the British claims to maritime supremacy. Kokoschka said, "Britannia no longer rules the waves. Inaction has lasted too long." You can see in the painting an octopus swimming away with a trident. This is an emblem of marine power. This woman here is Queen Victoria. She had built up the British fleet into a dominant position. We can see her riding a shark and stuffing white, brown, and black sailors into its mouth. The frog in her hand, seen here, refuses to accept the same fate. The frog represents Ireland, where there are no reptiles except frogs. This piece was intended to make a public statement. Kokoschka said that it was a warning of the consequences of man's intellectual arrogance. This allegorical painting is called the Prometheus Triptych and consists of 3 panels. Here in the center, we can see the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. They are depicted rising up with the gathering storm from the underworld and charging towards the earth. On the right panel, We can see a depiction of Prometheus, who stole fire so that man could challenge the gods, being punished by Zeus. Here he is chained to a rock with an eagle pecking at his liver. Prometheus symbolizes the dangers faced by contemporary civilization. The left-hand panel reveals a more optimistic view of hope. Here we can see Persephone as she is springing out of the clutch of Hades, who has previously abducted her. She is aided by her mother, Demeter, who stands in between them. In a later alteration of the painting, Kokoschka painted himself into the figure of Hades as a self-portrait, making this composition even more complex. The Prometheus triptych can be seen as being prophetic of the period, because Kokoschka was afraid that culture and society were being dominated by science and technology. He feared that this threatened the freedom and individuality of mankind. The Cold War and the nuclear arms race confirmed his fears in the 1950s.
One of the most influential and famous German printmakers of the 20th century was Käthe Kollwitz. She starkly depicted the plight of the poor and denounced the atrocities of war. Kollwitz's art resounds with compassion as she makes appeals on behalf of the working poor, the suffering, and the sick. Her work serves as an indictment of the social conditions in Germany during the late 19th and early 20th century. Working at a time when many artists used their art to investigate formal problems, Kollwitz devoted herself to describing the human condition. She declined the use of color, letting her vigorously clear and articulate line express urgency and social purpose, and her simplification of form and the absence of extraneous detail contribute to the power of her work. The Peasant War is a series of 6 etchings. The sequence starts with the causes of the uprising, in this case oppression and lack of rights. Kollwitz illustrates this in the first plate entitled The Plowman, with a father and son who are harnessed to the plow like animals. It is a grim and striking scene that shows Kollwitz's sympathy with the struggle of the working class, a sentiment that penetrates the scene. Kollwitz chose to leave the picture a bit sketchy without a great deal of small details, but the strong, dark lines seen throughout the etching also intensified the power of it. The viewer can sense the pain and struggle that the harnessed peasant must be feeling, because Kollwitz has managed to express that struggle through her work. In the second plate, entitled Raped, is an abused peasant woman lying in her devastated garden. The trodden down and broken plants symbolize the destruction of the woman's life. The detail of nature in the background is unusual in Kollwitz's work. The female figure lacks a great deal of detail, her face is hard to make out. The third print, entitled Sharpening the Scythe, alludes to the growing resolve to mount resistance, in this case embodied in the figure of a single woman who whets her scythe as a symbol of preparedness to fight. The sequence ends with the collapse of the uprising. In Battlefield, a woman searches at night for her fallen son amongst the dead on the battlefield by the light of a lantern. As in many of her works, there isn't a great deal of detail in the background, but there is enough to understand that there is a sea of dead bodies. The lantern illuminates a very young face among the dead, and the mother's hand. Kollwitz lost her youngest son, who served as a volunteer in the first week in World War I. From 1895 to 1898, Kollwitz worked on her series, A Weaver's Rebellion. Based on a play by Gerhard Hauptmann, the series chronicles an uprising of weavers and the ultimate demise of their rebellion. The final print, entitled End, illustrates the violent suppression of the uprising by the military. 2 women mourn the dead as another dead man is brought through the door. Gunsmoke shows that the fighting continues. The sorrow and desolation is clearly shown in the faces and posture of her figures. The central figure draws the viewer's attention with her extremely white saddened face and lifeless arms that fall by her side. Kollwitz strongly voiced her opposition to war, brutality, hunger, exploitation and discrimination, and dedication to human dignity and brotherhood through her works of art. She worked outside of the isms in creating these works. There are many artistic movements during the time that Kollwitz worked, which she cannot be put into. Impressionist paintings include visible brush strokes, light colors, open composition, ordinary subject matter, and unusual visual angles. Kollwitz uses the contrast of black and white instead of color. Her compositions are not open and airy, and the angles are ordinary. Fauvism emphasized painterly qualities and the use of deep color over the representational values retained by Impressionism. Fauvists simplified lines, exaggerated perspectives, and used brilliant but arbitrary colors. Again, most of Kollwitz's work lacked color and usual and unusual angles or perspectives. Suprematism and Art Deco are both based on geometric forms, and Kollwitz repeatedly chose the human form as a subject instead of geometric forms. In Cubist artworks, objects are broken up, analyzed, and reassembled in an abstracted form. Instead of depicting objects from one viewpoint, the artist depicts the subject from a multitude of viewpoints. It is easy to see why Kollwitz's work does not belong here, with one viewpoint that is not abstracted. Surrealism is a style in which fantastical visual imagery from the subconscious mind is used with no intention of making the work logically comprehensible. Kollwitz's work does not come from her mind, but rather from the people that she observes around her and the issues they deal with. Expressionism is the tendency of an artist to distort reality for an emotional effect. It is characterized by heightened, symbolic colors and exaggerated imagery. Although some resources attempted to place her in this category, Kollwitz hardly works with colors, let alone symbolically, and although her artwork does have a great deal of emotional impact, she doesn't distort reality to attain it. The power of her work comes from the fact that it is taken from the harshness of reality. Modernism encompasses the works of artists who rebelled against late 19th century traditions and confronted the new economic, social, and political aspects of the emerging modern world. It embraced disruption, rejecting or moving beyond simple realism. Kollwitz does not conform to the idea of modernism because she does not rebel against the teaching of those before. She isn't trying to progress art or style. She pursues her own interests and people. Kollwitz's last great series of lithographs, Death, treats that tragic theme with stark and monumental forms that convey a sense of drama. This piece, named Call of Death, is one of the 8 images in the series. It is one of several self-portraits. In 1940, her husband died, and in 1942 her grandson was killed in action during World War II. The bombing of Kollwitz's home and studio in 1943 destroyed much of her life's work. She died a few weeks before the end of the war in Europe.
Born at the end of the 19th century, Egon Schiele entered the world during all of this dynamic social transition. The end of the century was generating an onslaught of change throughout the world. The old way of thinking was being challenged. Humankind was evolving at its fastest pace to date, and the art world was fuel for the fire. With every new artistic movement that surfaced came a new philosophy. These philosophies stemmed from the growing world and the need for change. The old rules and the confines of the classic academia were too restrictive for artists like Schiele. Approaching visual outlook from new perspectives was more than a style or a political statement. It was essentially laying the foundation for the future of art. Egon Schiele, in one sense, embraced these ideologies, in another broke from them entirely. An acquaintance of Gustav Klimt, who Schiele admitted was an inspiration and a friend, he's often lumped into the category of German expressionists. But his brushstroke evolved from something deeper than aesthetic connection to the expression. Schiele's psychological makeup staggers through his line work and his dark palette. In this piece, called Pregnant Woman and Death, there are hints of influence from the expressionists, but the dark subject matter, the ominous relationship, and the cool color depths pull it out of any category. The morbid indulgence of works like this piece, called Death and the Girl, is not necessarily unique, but compared to this self-portrait, there is a vulnerability of his own ego that is revealed. He doesn't see himself as a complete person. Much of his work was considered, in a sense, to be pornographic. His nude studies were approached with vulgar, distorted perspectives. Though unsettling, they do reveal Schiele's self-doubt, his fears and insecurities, in simply being a human. An innocence of sorts is expressed, either willingly or not, in his anti-classical depictions of the human form. Even Schiele's landscapes, like this one, Four Trees, seem to nod towards influential genres of the day. There are impressionistic qualities to his brush here. Color, though muted, brightens a bleak horizon, and emotion flows from the composition. It seems introspective and symbolic. The day is lost, along with it something personal. This piece is called Agony. Here there is a marriage of art movements, manifestos, and genres collecting in this painting. Fauvism brings color to the canvas. Cubism distorts the reality. Expressionism is in the mood of the faces and the body language. And Impressionism is in the world of the clothing and the background. Delving deeper still, the clothing could be borrowed from the tendrils of the avant-garde, or even scenes from the neoclassical. Altogether, Schiele lifts himself from convention and creates his own genre. Toward the end of his young life, he finds love, and his self-awareness solidifies. In this painting of the artist's wife, Schiele's established style meets with this growing confidence in reality. Life is still fragmented, and we are not complete entities, but we are not alone. The tragic fact of the matter of this artist's evolution is that he only lived to be 28 years old. The Spanish influenza took his pregnant wife in the fall of 1918. The same illness took Egon Schiele 3 days later. Perhaps in his morbid self-exploration of humanity, there was too much reality.